Hey everybody, welcome to my channel, The Magical Solution. We are back. Hello, hello. It has been a very long time. I know. I've been MIA since before the new year. Lots of positive changes going on and just lots of things to keep up with. And I'm excited. I can't wait to talk to you guys all about it. But in the meantime, I am back. We are back. This is How We Grow is back. We have a wonderful lineup of interviewees coming starting next week, next Sunday, April 14th, and every Sunday after that, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But of course, we're starting with our book club tonight. That's what we're starting the YouTube channel with, is our book club. Why? Because we love knowledge. We love to keep it sharp up here, especially those of us who are spiritual people and whose spiritual practices are rooted in science and, understanding our world, right? So here we are. Speaking of which, since we are back, one of the things that I was requested, or people requested, was that I go back to reading more Allan Kardec books. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And I don't mind doing that. I really don't. But there are so many amazing authors within the spiritualist, spiritist, espiritismo, genre that he isn't the end all be all, so like let's explore some of these other amazing authors. I've already done Chico Xavier. I did his first book. Everybody loved that one, and I'm definitely going to do another one of his coming up soon. But another big influencer within the spiritualist community that a lot of people, don't really talk about is an individual named Andrew Jackson Davis, aka the Poughkeepsie Seer. I learned about him in middle school because, I live in like the Hudson Valley area, in the Poughkeepsie area. And so when I learned about him in high school, I was fascinated with him. And I was like, you know what? I think that would be a fun book to bring into this subject, or into this conversation. And the book that I'm referring to is entitled Harmonial Philosophy. It's kind of like a compendium of all of his different writings, although he has a ton other books as well too. But this one is a really, really popular one among like 2 or 3 others, which we may get into. It depends on how you receive this, because I'm not going to lie. Andrew Jackson Davis is a very like dry kind of writer. It's a very dense, intellectual, like it's like a medical book. So it's really just like, but hopefully, I'll be able to read it to you and explain it to you in a way that, keeps it fun and light. Let's see. We'll see how it goes. So let me get to sharing screen, because that's kind of important. Where's the share screen button? Settings. No. Hold on. I know how to do this. I did this before. There it is. Okay, so share screen. And then I'm going to go to this window right here. Boom. And then I'm going to put it like that. Beautiful. And before I do, I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to see, there's the book. Can you guys see that? Why don't you give me a thumbs up if you guys can see that? The Harmonial Philosophy, a compendium and digest of the works of Andrew Jackson Davis, aka the Poughkeepsie Seer. And so this first book, Natural and Divine Revelations, is the most popular. Then, of course, The Great Harmonia, yes. And a few others that are like super, super popular. And they're all going to be put in here together. And then it was edited by a doctor of Hermetic Sciences, which is another reason why I love this, because I'm all about the Hermeticism. Okay. Would you like me to do the preface before we get to the chapters? You tell me. What do you want me to do? Hey! You want me to do the preface? Let me know. Preface? Preface? Preface. I'm being stupid. Okay, let's do it. Let me get back to this game here. Okay. So the seership of Andrew Jackson Davis was attracting wide attention in America, and more restricted sense was known also in England some few years before the Rochester Knockings inaugurated the epic of modern spiritualism. By that hypothesis, it gave forth, like the latter, a revelation from the world beyond, and was to all intents and purposes an early example of trance mediumship. Though Davis never claimed to speak under the influence of specific personal controls, like the long line of psychic orators who came before him or came after him and were, for the better part, his contemporaries, as he was, on the one hand, so much the most important of all there is, no person who could be placed in second rank beneath him. So he has been all of the most popular. The Principles of Nature. This is the book I was telling you guys about. The Principles of Nature is like one of his most popular books. It was his very first book, right? Which, we will definitely get to. So the Principles of Nature is his first book of revelations, and the only one which claims to have been dictated by him in the magnetic state, has passed through at least 44 American editions, and there is no question that it is still in demand. It is likely to be reprinted again, perhaps many times over. It is the most comprehensive of all his writings. He wrote and published continuously during a long period of years, and his readers seem to have been no less eager than he was himself, untiring, the demand for his successive volumes always large. His collected works have been issued on several occasions, available sometimes in single volumes separately, sometimes in complete ones. The reason of this popularity is not far to seek. In The Principles of Nature, a philosophy of modern spiritualism preceded spiritualism itself, and so also a doctrine concerning the world beyond in that sphere, which was held to be in immediate continuity with the life of Earth, was put forward as a result of personal knowledge in seership, while later on 1,000 voices coming from the sphere, and according to the claim of spiritualism, speaking through 1,000 mediums, testified to its general truth. There is no seer of the past, and there is no prophet who had such a cloud of witnesses. The effect was greater and stronger because they did not set out to testify in favor of Davis. He was not for them the precursor of all those voices, but that which he affirmed was by them verified without reference to him. The doctrine, in a word, was that the world beyond is as natural as the world as of ours, and that is neither the heaven nor the hell of official Christianity, that it is simply this world spiritualized, and that men and women in their psychic bodies are also men and women here in bodies of flesh, but with better opportunities of progress and a far better environment. They are encompassed by helpers innumerable, so that those even who pass from this life of earth in a state of hardened criminality have every encouragement to amend and ultimately never fail to do so. In a word, the gospel of Davis is common with that of spiritualism, cast out all fear concerning the life to come, and is the prototype of Davis is still greater seer in the person of Emanuel Swedenborg. But whatever its claims and merits, about which much yet remains to be said after a new manner, the doctrine of the New Jerusalem, according to the Swedish prophet, will bear no comparison on the ground of popular appeal with the divine revelations of him who was the Poughkeepsie seer and the exponent of harmonial philosophy. It is obvious that this is put forward in the only reasonable and therefore possible sense, not as a test of truth or even a title of excellence, but as purely explanatory statement concerning a great vogue. Whatever their deserts or defects otherwise, the postulated principles of nature are embodied in a work which marks an epoch, and it gave a great status to spiritualism when the movement and all its hosts of phenomenon were still in the womb of time. Later on, it is evidence abundantly that the movement and the revelations involved therein reacted on Davis quite naturally and quite of necessity too. They led, of course, to no change of ground, for essentially they belonged to one another, but he was stimulated under the influence, and they gave him, moreover, a field, an audience, and an opportunity which could scarcely have had in their absence. This was the position at the beginning of the new movement, and speaking as one who is acquainted with all the activities in nearly the whole literature of modern psychological and occult schools, it remains to be said that, so far as English-speaking countries are concerned, the seer and prophet of spiritualism in its first days is even now par excellence, but I speak of excellence as judged within the limits of the schools, the prophet and philosopher, if not also the seer of the present moment. Time has changed otherwise the actual modus vivendi in many important respects. No one speaks of a rainbow belt among the star clouds of the Milky Way as the world of disembodied souls. No one expresses our owns to any special view or concerns about humanities other than planets and whether they proceed at death to that second sphere which receives souls from Earth. No one accepts or denies the Davis classification of the 6 spheres of intelligent beings, with a 7th, which is a central sun and the more particular abode of the Godhead. But of the general philosophy of spiritualism and of all that is weak as of all that is strong therein, Davis is the general exponent, if only because there is, particularly speaking, no other who has arisen. It is difficult even now to take up a current number of any periodical devoted to the concerns of the subject and not find that he is quoted. His classification of mediumship was in all probability a matter of suspicion from the beginning, and it might be derived now, while there are many other views of his which have passed into utter desuetude. But he himself remains the spokesman at large of the subject, so far as man's place in the universe, the continuity and interpenetration of the two worlds are concerned. On the other hand, insofar as he came forward in the guise of a scientific teacher, under control or psychic influence, he probably convinced few or none, even at the beginning, and he reflects now the most primitive side of the most exploded authorities. His title to consideration are those of a seer. His visions of the world beyond are appealing side of his seership, and for persons who accept the possibility of such experiences, there is nothing in all the annuals of psychism to compare with his summer land. 10,000 controls of later mediumship, except insofar as they reflect his revelations, tell us little or nothing concerning the phenomenon of physically disembodied life. He has set out all its phases, all its topography, all concerns therein, and we shall doubtless have to wait the advent of another prophet before anything substantial is added thereunto or altered substantially therein. Meanwhile, the important investigations of psychical research, apart from the professed spiritualism, removed us by the nature of things from the philosophy of the subject, being concerned with the facts of manifestations and with tolerable deductions from these, not with the nature and pursuits of the spiritual spheres of being. Now, the collected writings of Andrew Jackson Davis fill 27 volumes, full of repetitions, verberosities, and extraneous material. On account of the position which he has occupied for a period of 70 years in a movement which numbers at this day many thousands of adherents in Great Britain and the colonies alone, it has seemed to the present editor that it would be serviceable to them and others to present in the form of a digest the essential parts of his doctrine. philosophy, and testimony to the world of spirits and the natural law therein. The result of the undertaking is offered in this volume. As regards all this is incorporated and all that is excluded represents, of course, the personal views of the editor in respect of presumptive values, and he makes no claim to the possession of the final criterion. The work has been done with sincerity. Nothing has been inserted because it appeals to him personally, apart from other considerations, and nothing has been omitted because it opposes his views. Except upon points of fact, those views are obtruded nowhere, and as far as possible, they enter into expression nowhere. The object has been to present the essence of Davis, and though the task as a whole has been anxious rather than easy, there has been throughout a singular satisfaction in observing how this essence has been extracted in the process of condensation without diminution of any kind, though many original pages have been represented occasionally by the single paragraph. There is no need to say that the process has involved re-expression, as it is believed to the advantage of Davis and never to the sacrifice of the meaning which he designated to convey. A few among those who know him may think that his anti-theological views should have been represented more fully, but enough has been given to show how he stood as to this subject. The particular circumstances under which he was born and lived denied him qualities for judgment thereupon. Even at his own period, he did not represent the real difficulties of the doctrine, and at the present day we are dealing with different and perhaps greater difficulties. In any case, the ground has changed, and the animadversions, the animadversions of Davis, both in and out of season, both too often sacrificing the logical sequence of his text, were of less moment of their period than the discourses of the Bradlaugh and Ingersoll, and are of no consequence now. There are a few others who may feel that an undue space has been given to the descriptions of the Summerland, as Davis claims to have seen it in his superior condition, but without attempting to pronounce on their value, it is believed that they have been always the chief attraction of his revelations, and that his harmonial philosophy, apart from these, as a title or warrant in seership, would scarcely demand presentation in a new form. Its great occasional insight and suggestion notwithstanding, it is in connection with these more especially that this work has been undertaken, and to mark the philosophical aspects of the claim respecting intervention between the physical and spiritual worlds. So to sum it up, the message of Davis, as here presented, stands in the editor's opinion for the spirit or essence of the whole, liberated only from unwieldy accretions into which the essence does not enter, and of course separated from other extraneous matter, as, for example, things which belong to the domain of the medical formula. It is very curious in conclusion to note that various points at which the harmonial philosophy of Davis is in quite unconscious harmony with the Hermetic sciences of which the editor claims to be a student, and also with the later theory of evolution. A few instances belonging to the first case have been cited in the notes, and the most striking of all being his theory of a universal fluid, which corresponds to the astral light of the Martionists and to the Kabbalists' so-called light of glory. These analogues could have been traced further, but it exceeded the present undertaking, which appeals to a class of minds whose acquaintance with the occult lore cannot be presupposed. All right, so that was your preface, which basically just stated, look, we compiled all of his writings and we took all the good parts and we discarded the parts that had nothing to do with physical reality, especially the parts that spoke more about medicine and medical needs, because we wanted to keep it spiritual. Like they wanted to keep it within this realm. The editor, being that of a Hermetic scholar, also took a lot of joy in seeing a lot of the parallels between Davis's philosophies and the philosophies of Hermeticism and Kabbalism. And so he made sure to make notes of that. And that's pretty much it. But for the most part, just to kind of keep you guys in the loop, you know, whatchamacallit, let me actually make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Here we go. So for the most part, Andrew Jackson Davis, the Poughkeepsie seer, you know, he saw himself more as like a philosopher than as a psychic. Now, don't get me wrong, there are both books and, you know, dialogues where he is under what we would consider trance, or maybe like a higher type of meditation, where he receives messages and he writes all of those things down as dictated, but he still doesn't see himself as like a proper medium. But for the most part, Andrew Jackson Davis would be what we would consider today the father of modern spiritualism, right? So him, along with the Fox sisters, along with a bunch of other people in New York, really, really pioneered this idea of spiritualism, which then made its way back to Europe and into the hands of what we would consider, you know, the father of spiritism, Allan Kardec, who then expounded upon a lot of these ideas with the evidence-based approach and scientific method approach, and codified it as spiritism. Then that made its way back to the Americas through colonialism and through the Caribbean, South America, Central America, and started to see the many manifestations of it once it interacted with the indigenous and Afro-Caribbean populations. And this is where we start to see Espiritismo take its place, right? So to understand all of this, we gotta go back. You know what I mean? We gotta go back to that original root, to that place. And this guy right here was just an average Joe Schmo dude living in Poughkeepsie, you know, just minding his business, and who decided to like do this. And here we are today. And his works are quoted to this day. His works are foundational to the Spiritist movement. And so we get a chance to kind of read a compendium of all of these different pieces. However, I do definitely encourage you to read all of his books, like in completion, you know. But this one is a great one to read, I personally feel, for the public, because it gives a little bit of all of his stuff. All right, so let's get to it. So much, 400 pages, y'all. Look at this. Look how many. Look, when I said that we're gonna be here for a minute, we're gonna be here for a minute. We're going. This might take us a whole ass year to finish this book, but let's do it. Let's do it. All right. Do you want me to go into his biography? Let me know right now. Send me a... Oops. That was not what I was trying to do. I apologize. Here we go. Hi there. Yeah, it is a great book and it is exhausting. It's a very... Okay, so right now in the comments section, all I see is Facebook user. So I don't know who's commenting, like your names are not showing up except for Lavetta. And so the person who wrote, "Oh Lord, this book," why do I have a feeling that that's Steven? Steven, is that you? Is that you, Mr. Stephen Patrick? Because I know you and I talked about this book and we were just like, oh, it is exhausting. Yeah, it is. It is very exhausting, but it's a good book. And I think anyone who really takes their mediumship seriously, anyone who really takes their spiritual practice seriously, I think should definitely dive into this book. I mean, it's so juicy. All right, so nobody wants me to read his from start to finish. Lavetta's like, yes, read his biography. Okay, got you. All right. So Andrew Davis Action was born on the 11th of August, 1826, Blooming Grove, Orange County, in the state of New York. His father, Samuel Davis, described as a simple-hearted, unsophisticated man, followed the trade of a shoemaker and weaver. varied by haymaking and harvesting at their proper seasons. There was a moderately numerous family, the general characteristic of which was extreme poverty. Both father and mother, both father and mother are said in the first autobiographical record of Andrew Jackson to have been destitute. Oh shit, what happened there? That's weird. To have been destitute. Why is my computer acting silly? Hold on. There we go. Destitute of the commonest education, meaning presumably that they could neither read nor write. Occasional intemperance, for it does not seem to have been rooted and continuous habit, was the chief weakness of the former in the boy's earlier days. But he worked hard, as his opportunities offered, and tried various humble schemes to improve his position, frequent migrations included. As delineated by her son, the mother possessed a spirit of meekness and quiet, unqualified by any really positive element of character. Davis was only 2 years old when there was a hurried sale of effects and a removal to Staatsburg, followed in 1832 by a second exodus, this time to Hyde Park in Dutchess County, also in the state of New York. Here, the family was stationary for about 6 years when it proceeded to Poughkeepsie, where occurred those events which were to shape the future life of Davis, and in consequence of which he became and has continued to be known as the Poughkeepsie Seer. His first tuition was obtained at Hyde Park Village in a species of dame's school, but presently under other auspices. Sorry, this thing is my computer is so weird. I apologize, you guys. The experiment was highly unsuccessful, and it is said to have been dropped speedily, though resumed in his 12th year, as he says, for a few weeks only, and again at Poughkeepsie, apparently in the closing weeks of 1839 and the beginning of the following year. He confesses altogether to 5 months of education, by the help of which he acquired some rudiments of reading, writing, and ciphering. The schooling was interspersed with various humble employments, humiliating in their results as the teaching, for according to his own description, he was dull, backward, and clumsy, not to speak of timid and oversensitive nature. Such as it was, his religious training was also of a haphazard kind, picked up between church and meeting house, with little regularity at either. His mother, who shines through his early life with much patience and sweetness amidst her incessant difficulties, had, however, some elements of piety. After a crude manner and a speaking generally, he responded to her good influence, partly by sympathy and partly through natural goodness in his own character. In the early part of 1841, her death put an end to their companionship. The main points of his record during the period which followed this loss, as indeed previously, are concerned with miscellaneous and mostly abortive efforts to retain such employment as came his way. There is no reason for reciting them in this place, and the narrative may pass, therefore, to that period and occurrence which was to influence his entire life and reveal his future vocation. At the close of 1843, Andrew Jackson Davis, being only 17 years of age, an inerrant phrenologist and mesmerist named Grimes, appeared at Poughkeepsie and lectured on animal magnetism. Davis attended and was one of the subjects on whom the professor tried certain experiments, but in this case unsuccessfully. There was, however, a tailor in the village by the name of William Livingston, who, as the result of Grimes' visit, made a trial of his own powers in producing magnetic phenomena. He appears to have achieved considerable success, and Davis came at length into his hands. On the very first occasion, it is affirmed that the boy exhibited powers of clairvoyance which were truly surprising. This is on the authority of William Fishbaugh, whose introduction appears in every edition of the Principles of Nature. Davis, on his part, records the circumstances and his recollected experience at length in the work already quoted. He describes his first sensations when the operator's hands passed and repassed over his head. the momentary illumination which followed, the intense darkness thereafter, a conviction of actual disillusion, the transitory and vain struggle against the whole operation, and the consciousness that he was lying supine, incapable of all physical motion. Therefore, he tells us consciousness was itself suspended, and the rest of his account embodies that which he heard from others. In the presence of witnesses and with eyes bandaged, he had read from a newspaper, told the time by a watch, described the complaints from which certain spectators were suffering, in all cases with accuracy. This experiment took place on December 1st of 1843. Now, Davis frequented Livingston's parlor night after night, not without inexpressible apprehensions, but with uniformly successful results. At each session, some new truth or interesting wonder would make its appearance, and the operator freely admitting all whom curiosity and expectation drew towards the new prodigy, thus manifesting in the little community. The result was an exceedingly mixed audience with considerable notoriety for the subject, not unmixed with hostility and even persecution. On January 1st of 1844, Davis, according to his story, made his first psychic flight through space. Though his recollection concerning it appears to have come long after the event, he describes himself as born again in the spirit. It seemed that the whole earth, with all its inhabitants, had been suddenly translated into some Elysium. He saw not only the encompassing auras of the various spectators, but their physical bodies became transparent as a sheet of glass, and invested with a strange, rich spiritual beauty. He beheld within the veil every separate material organ and the peculiar emanations by which each was surrounded. It is claimed also that behind the real physical structures, he became conscious of the indwelling essence and the vitalic elements. This was the first stage of his visions, and the second brought within his field of consciousness the furniture in the room about him and the walls by which it was enclosed. The walls dissolved, and he could see into the adjoining house. This was the second stage, and he passed thereafter into what he terms a deeper sleep, in which, by a process of interpenetration, he was placed in rapport with nature. He became aware of a high and eternal communion, as between that which was within him and that which is alive in the world. The earth opened to his view, and he explored the mineral kingdom, the properties and the essences of plants, the internal physiology of the animal creations. He saw something also of man, in the sense that all animate nature was working up towards humanity. On another occasion, the date being March 6th of the same year, the magnetic condition was induced as usual, but experiencing a painful impression from what is termed the spheres. Of the sitters, he quitted the operator's premises, and being still in the subjective state, called at the house of a clergyman, proceeding thence to the operator's private residence, where he was staying at the time, and there going straight to bed. He awakened still under the magnetic influence, dressed, and went out into the street, passing from point to point with a fleetness indescribable. It was still night, and under the heavenly archway, he appeared to stand alone, alone, unseen by any save the eye of the eternal being. An allegorical vision followed, concerning a shadowy congregation of clean and beautiful sheep, and their shepherd, a kind and gentle being endowed with physical and spiritual perfection. The flock represented humanity, and the herdsman was a reformer among it, whose mission was to overcome ignorance and confusion therein. The part of Davis in the vision was to help the shepherd in his tending which was at length accomplished, after which the flock is guided, proceeded onward, and vanished in the distance. The scene changed presently, and he was across the river of the Hudson, now overcome with fatigue, again restored inwardly, now in storm and darkness, again under a clear sky in the daylight, now conscious of sleeping, then of awakening, and finally finding himself in an utterly strange region. Once more he beheld a scattered crowd of sheep striving to climb a hill, and a shepherd like the former one, whom he was also called to help, with similar results. At a later period, teachers came to himself, and between their visits he inquired of a person in a farmer's dress how far it was to Poughkeepsie. He was told that it was about 40 miles. He began traveling homeward, alternately sleeping and running. Part of his instructions were concerned with the art of healing, but this was also conveyed figuratively, and part told him that through his mediation new light would come to mankind. All this time he was traveling in the physical body though only conscious in the spirit. And at length he reached Poughkeepsie and returned to the house of Livingston, having been absent since the previous night. It was not until he had eaten a hearty meal that he regained his normal sensibility. He was magnetized as usual on the following evening, and then proceeded to explain the moral of his recent vision. They signified a complete change, an end to the gratification of curiosity and the advancement of magnetic science by devoting the clairvoyant faculties of the seer exclusively to the healing of the sick. The limits of sittings were fixed. The manner of conducting the magnetic process was prescribed, and it was laid down that there should be no charge for consultation except to those who were in easy circumstances. Davis represents his operator, the tailor, Livingston, as having an abundant and profitable business. But he was a man inspired with the love of humanity, and this to such an extent that, encouraged by his wife, he gave up his trade to follow the course outlined by the young seer. A clairvoyant clinic was opened accordingly, beginning at Poughkeepsie and extended afterwards to Bridgeport, Connecticut. Operator and subject living as they could upon the proceeds which came in to the common coffer. But as the days drew towards the summer of 1845, Davis was in labor with the undetermined sense of another mission, a wider, more important field of labor, concurrently with which he became acquainted with Dr. S.S. Lyon of Bridgeport, apparently an ordinary medical practitioner whom he convinced of the truth of clairvoyance. Now, Davis, in his entranced condition, had delivered already some 2 or 3 lectures, and as the horizon cleared inwardly before him, he saw what his coming work lay in this direction, or to put it quite plainly and boldly, a book was about to be delivered in sections in the magnetic state and reduced into writing by a scribe present on the occasions. There was to be one magnetizer, and there was to be one scribe only. And so did Davis, something less at the date in question than 20 years old. He entered upon a new phase of his career, and the connection with his previous operator came to an end abruptly. For while in the clairvoyant state, he voluntarily chose Dr. Lyon to be his magnetizer during the delivery of his book. The reporter, similarly selected, being the Reverend William Fishbaugh of New Haven, Connecticut, probably a Universalist minister, as the seer decided further that the revelations must take place in New York rather than Bridgeport. Dr. Lyon relinquished a remunerative and increasing practice, with the result that another clairvoyant clinic had to be opened at the new center as a visible means of substance for operator and subject during the long course of the lectures. In addition to the operator and the scribe, 3 permanent witnesses were selected, so that the world through them might know from what source these revelations flow. They were Reverend J. N. Parker, Theron A. Laffin, and Dr. T. Leah Smith, of whom little or nothing is known at this day beyond the brief references of Davis. The lectures, to the number of 157, were delivered at 92 Green Street in Manhattan from November 28, 1845 to January 25, 1847. Apart from any public announcements, a few persons being privately notified from time to time. The remarkable scheme had therefore no financial aspect, so far as its chief actors were concerned. As regards to procedure, it will be sufficient to state that the subject was hoodwinked, as was the case also in the previous experiments and throughout the diagnosis generally, that he was put invariably into the magnetic condition, and that the seer dictated to the operator slowly and in a low voice, the operator repeating the words aloud, making sure that they had been heard correctly, after which they were written down by the scribe. The source of information was claimed to be the spiritual world. But apart from any special personality thus constituting, at whatever may be its importance and value, one salient distinction between the Davis communications and a considerable proportion of those which characterize the seance through many subsequent years. In a word, the Manhattan oration were the first to be delivered in trance and inspirational poems of Thomas Lake Harris, coming probably next in time, as they do currently, importance. In the digest which follows, The Principles of Nature, into which the lectures developed, will speak adequately for itself. Here it will be sufficient to add a word only on two external facts. The means for its publication came at the right moment, as they seem to come always in cases of this kind, through the munificence of private sources, and the work was prepared for the press by Williams Fishbaugh, who gives a scrupulous account as to his hand therein. The following heads of the particulars are worth noting as indications of his personal good faith. He made needful corrections in grammar, pruned certain verbal redundancies, and elucidated some obscure sentences. He altered nothing in respect of the ideas, and moreover added nothing, which these unimportant qualifications he bears witness that the work, in its published form, may be considered as paragraph for paragraph, sentence for sentence, and word for word, as it was delivered by the author. With no exception, the appended annotations were those of Fishbaugh, but they were very few and unimportant and have not been reproduced here. A little prior to the publication of this work, Davis felt that what he terms the second magnetic crisis of his life was on the threshold or within the door. As a fact, he was put to sleep by Dr. Lyon for the last time on April 10th, 1847, and he looked in other directions for the further development of his powers. Such at least was the testimony of Thomas Lake Harris, the inspirational poet, who had become acquainted with him at this time and is claimed to have looked for his guidance during a brief period. On August 11th, Davis attained his 21st year when it was proposed to establish a reform paper to be entitled the Universalium, with Dr. S.B. Britton as an editor-in-chief. He was another friend of that season and well known in the circles of liberal thinking, as he was subsequently in the spiritualistic movement for a considerable number of years. The project was brought to birth, and Davis was one of the contributors, but adequate capital was wanting for such a venture, and its struggle for existence ceased at the end of 1948. In the meantime, or specifically on July 1st, 1948, Davis was married to the woman whose generosity had mainly made possible the publication of The Principles of Nature. She was much older than himself and had occasion to secure a divorce from her first husband before the union could take place. The history of this period is really that of liberation of Davis from the leading strings of magnetic operators. He was conscious and has put on record the fact that he could enter the superior state whenever circumstances and his own will demanded it. Under these circumstances, and without, as he tells us, the aid of any scribe or help from other books, he began writing the first volume of his next most considerable work, the Great Harmonia. This was during the autumn of 1849 and the spring of the following year. In this manner, there passes into record the beginning of that psychic, intellectual, and literary life which Davis was to lead henceforth. His books are its landmarks, and to all intents and purposes, they represent it fully that the bibliography of his writings at the end of the present volume might be taken as a sufficient supplement to the present biographical note. Everything else is transitory, and its interest has perished long ago, as those who at this day may undertake the experiment of reading The Magic Staff and Beyond the Valley, which are his memoirs, very much at large, are likely to find to their cost. Here it will be sufficient to say that she who was his first wife died on November 2nd, 1853, and on May 15th, 1855, he was married for a second time, as Miss Katie Dodge secured a divorce with the intention of marrying Davis, if and when it was obtained. So Miss May Love was moving for similar liberation when that which Davis terms a clairvoyant penetration had discovered a genuine fitness between her soul and his. The second union continued for something like 29 years, when it terminated on November 18th, 1884, in a letter which Davis wrote to his wife, addressing her as my companion in the work. And this course was subsequently clinched by a nullity decree on the ground that the divorce obtained by Mr. Love in 1854 by Mary Love was not sufficiently valid in the state of New York, where Davis married her subsequently. Mary Davis raised no plea against the proceedings, and apparently with a broken heart resumed her maiden name as Mary Fennel. This is enough to register in the present place concerning a particularly painful business. Davis appears to have entered the married state for a third time, as it has been stated that his beloved wife, Della, ministered to his last earthly needs, and at that time of his death. For the rest, he was an active and ready lecturer on the Harmonial philosophy. He was connected editorially and otherwise with several periodicals, among others the Herald of Progress, and, generally speaking, with a number of reform movements. Moreover, in about the year 1886, having taken up the study of medicine through the authorized channels, he earned and received his diploma of M.D. from the United States Medical College of New York. Though he claimed always to be guided by an inward light and to possess, as we have seen, the power to pass continually and voluntarily into higher psychic conditions in which the unseen world opened its vistas before him, The Principles of Nature is the only work which he dictated in an entranced state, so that it stands in a category by itself when compared with his later writings. It was certain manifest resemblances with the revelations of Swedenborg, and it may be noted that Davis claimed the Swedish seer as one of his early guides. He took exception, however, as we have seen, to the notion that he occupied the position of a medium in relation to any spirit, as if my mind, while in the superior condition, were an insensible, unintelligent, and passive substance or spout through which disembodied personages express or promulgate their own specific opinions. The remark has reference to the principles of nature, and Davis describes with considerable detail his mental state as one of watching and analyzing on the night that its dictation began, and when he was like a conscious mirror on which were reflected and in which were focalized the principles and properties of the system of nature. His magnetization or entrancement produced, therefore, only a suspension of physical faculties, which expipathesi liberated and extended his interior powers. No seer of ancient or modern times has given so lucid an account of his psychic states as remembered subsequently. And while the principles of nature is accurately described in the preface to the present volume as the most comprehensive of all his writings, it is of course not the most mature. Personally, Davis preferred Penetralia to any of his other books on the ground that it was the wisest, an opinion probably endorsed by very few of his readers. In any case, it is believed that he is represented at his best, by no one work, but rather by that harmony and digest of all which is presented here. The Poughkeepsie seer departed this life on January 13th, 1910. And since his entrance into the Summerland, there seems no evidence of his communication with the first sphere. Woo! Oh, man. Here we go. Book 1, Revelations of Divine Being. But it's already 8 o'clock. Or it's at least 8 minutes to 8 o'clock. So I guess this first live was just to read you the preface. And the next time we meet, we will get into chapter 1. But overall, I think it's important for you to get, an understanding of who Andrew Davis Jackson was. Like, for really real, like, he was a very, very gifted clairvoyant, but he was definitely... he just didn't want to identify as a medium because in his mind, the way he understood it was that he is able to slip into these higher states of consciousness and speak to spirits without ever having to give up his consciousness to these spirits. Meaning he doesn't have to mount spirits to get information from them. And his whole thing is pretty insane. He was able to project his consciousness from one place to another. They were able to blindfold him, and he was able to read newspapers and look at people's watches on the time on people's watches, all through his blindfold, because he was able to project his consciousness outside of his body so that he could literally see the world without actually using his physical eyes. He was able to see physical ailments within people, because when he went into these altered states, he could look at people and they became see-through, and he was able to see their organs. He was able to see things that were not well, and he was able to diagnose. So all this stuff he was able to do, but he still did not identify as a medium. It was something that kind of bothered him a little bit. But, for those of you who may not have been familiar with some of the things that were being said. So for example, they talk about animal magnetism, where he goes and he sees a lecture on animal magnetism and he sees it being done and he volunteers to be magnetized, right? So animal magnetism started with Dr. Mesmer, right? So he's another pioneer within our spiritualist community. Dr. Mesmer is the guy responsible for what we now call spiritual and magnetic passes, right? So the Espiritistas and the Spiritists that who practice magnetic passes, that all stemmed from Dr. Mesmer back in the day. And he started this first with animal magnetism, and he wrote his whole thesis utilizing animals first. Then he moved into with people, and specifically people in mental health wards and things like that, in psych wards and stuff like that. Yes, exactly, Lavetta. So I will be, thank you, girl. I'm so bad at advertising myself. You are the best. So speaking of magnetic passes and spiritual passes, I will be teaching a class on April 18th on how to do magnetic passes. We will be going over all the stuff. So definitely sign up for that class. It is going to be very informative, very awesome. I'll also give you a few exercises that you can do on your own person, or even on your pets and animals and even your plants at home. So definitely join in for that. It'll be a great class. Anyway, thank you so much for that. But so when he volunteered for this, magnetism, that's when he realized, like, shit is wild. So this person did this magnetism to me. And again, unless you're familiar with spiritual anatomy, unless you're familiar with how our spiritual fluids work, all this stuff that I'm saying right now is going to be like gibberish to you. So again, take this class so that you can understand what I'm talking about. But once he realized that he was basically activated, quote unquote, or magnetized, all of a sudden he was really able to like really deep dive into his clairvoyance. And every session that he had gotten, he got better and better and better, and he got more and more clairvoyant, and his abilities got more and more. And then it got to a point where, he went there and nothing else was happening. Like, he reached like a plateau. He reached the limit of what he was able to do within this lifetime. And once he accepted that and understood that, then he realized it was, now there's a next part of the journey. And the next part of the journey was to write books and to talk about this. Then the next part of the journey after that was to then become a medical doctor and then apply this to medicine and our health. And then that's a whole nother thing. So when I tell you that this motherfucker did it all, like when I tell you he not only came up with the cosmologies, the philosophies, the theory regarding our cosmos, like the planets, he was able to incorporate things like the music of the spheres, things like Hermeticism, stuff that he had no reference to, because he was technically an illiterate kid. Like, he grew up in what we would consider, a poor family. Both parents couldn't really read. His schooling was very, very, very limited, and his access to information was very limited. But he was speaking, and he had an internal knowing already about these things. And so when it all started gelling for him, this is when these books started coming out, and he played such a pivotal role in the spiritist movement. His books are foundational to what it is that we do. So I am so excited to like read these with you guys, like, and do this stuff with you guys. Like, Andrew Jackson Davis is so fucking like fascinating. So I'm really excited to get into this with you guys. So every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I will be hosting a private book club with my spiritual development group on Facebook. So it's only in that group that I'll be doing those readings. And then the hour following, which is 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesdays, I will be here with you guys reading our public book, specifically this one, for probably like the next year. So strap in, put it on your calendar, okay? Get your cookies and your tea and your popcorn and your notebook, and just come and join me. Ask questions, put your own thoughts and ideas down. Let's brainstorm, because that's what it's all about. I completely forgot to turn on TikTok and Instagram, so I do apologize that this first live did not get to those social media outlets, but I will promise to do it next time. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me. Once again, my name is Leilani. This is The Magical Solution, and this is how we grow. You guys have a beautiful week. I will see you next week. And don't forget, on the 14th, Sunday, we will have an interview, our first interview of the spring. And I'm so excited. And I'm not going to tell you who it is because it's a surprise. And yeah, have a good one, guys.